is audible.
Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Brief History of Neoliberalism by David Harvey, narrated by Clive Chafer. Introduction. Future historians may well look upon the years 1978 to 80 as a revolutionary turning point in the world's social and economic history. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping took the first momentous steps towards the liberalization of a communist-ruled economy in a country that accounted for a fifth of the world's population. The path that Deng defined was to transform China in 2 decades from a closed backwater to an open center of capitalist dynamism with sustained growth rates unparalleled in human history. On the other side of the Pacific, and in quite different circumstances, a relatively obscure but now renowned figure named Paul Volcker took command at the U.S. Federal Reserve in July 1979, and within a few months dramatically changed monetary policy. The Fed thereafter took the lead in the fight against inflation, no matter what its consequences, particularly as concerned unemployment. Across the Atlantic, Margaret Thatcher had already been elected Prime Minister of Britain in May 1979 with a mandate to curb trade union power and put an end to the miserable inflationary stagnation that had enveloped the country for the preceding decade. Then in 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States, and armed with geniality and personal charisma, set the U.S. on course to revitalize its economy by supporting Volcker's moves at the Fed and adding his own particular blend of policies to curb the power of labor, deregulate industry, agriculture, and resource extraction, and liberate the powers of finance both internally and on the world stage. From these several epicenters, revolutionary impulses seemingly spread and reverberated to remake the world around us in a totally different image. Transformations of this scope and depth do not occur by accident, so it is pertinent to inquire by what means and paths the new economic configuration, often subsumed under the term globalization, was plucked from the entrails of the old. Volcker, Reagan, Thatcher, and Deng Xiaoping all took minority arguments that had long been in circulation and made them majoritarian, though in no case without a protracted struggle. Reagan brought to life the minority tradition that stretched back within the Republican Party to Barry Goldwater in the early 1960s. Deng saw the rising tide of wealth and influence in Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea, and sought to mobilize market socialism instead of central planning to protect and advance the interests of the Chinese state. Volcker and Thatcher both plucked from the shadows of relative obscurity a particular doctrine that went under the name of Neoliberalism, and transformed it into the central guiding principle of economic thought and management. And it is with this doctrine, its origins, rise, and implications, that I am here primarily concerned. Neoliberalism is in the first instance a theory of political economic practices that proposes that human well-being can best be advanced by liberating individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills within an institutional framework characterized by strong private property rights, free markets, and free trade. The role of the state is to create and preserve an institutional framework appropriate to such practices. The state has to guarantee, for example, the quality and integrity of money. It must also set up those military, defense, police, and legal structures and functions required to secure private property rights and to guarantee, by force if need be, the proper functioning of markets. Furthermore, if markets do not exist, in areas such as land, water, education, healthcare, social security, or environmental pollution, then they must be created, by state action if necessary. But beyond these tasks, the state should not venture. State interventions in markets once created must be kept to a bare minimum, because, according to the theory, the state cannot possibly possess enough information to second-guess market signals, prices, and because powerful interest groups will inevitably distort and bias state interventions, particularly in democracies, for their own benefit. There has everywhere been an emphatic turn towards neoliberalism in political economic practices and thinking since the 1970s. Deregulation, privatization, and withdrawal of the state from many areas of social provision have been all too common. Almost all states, from those newly minted after the collapse of the Soviet Union to old-style social democracies and welfare states such as New Zealand and Sweden, have embraced, sometimes voluntarily and in other instances in response to coercive pressures, some version of neoliberal theory and adjusted at least some policies and practices accordingly. Post-apartheid South Africa quickly